The arena lights cast shadows that should not have existed. 300 witnesses would later swear they saw something that defied the laws of physics, yet most would eventually dismiss their own memories as impossible. A man weighing 135 pounds had done something to a heavyweight champion that medical science said could not happen. The smaller man had not even bothered to warm up. According to later accounts, the tension in the room had been palpable long before anyone stepped through the ropes. The air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation, though no formal match had been scheduled. This was supposed to be a demonstration, a friendly exhibition between two masters of their respective arts. Yet everyone present sensed something else brewing beneath the surface. A confrontation between philosophies as much as between men. The challenger stood at the edge of the ring, completely still. Witnesses would later recall the unsettling quality of his stillness. While others stretched and shadowboxed, he simply observed, hands hanging loose at his sides. His street clothes, a simple shirt and training pants, suggested he had not planned to participate at all. Those close enough to see his eyes reported something that made them unconsciously step back. An absence of emotion so complete it seemed to create its own gravitational field. The heavyweight champion, by contrast, moved with the fluid confidence of a man who had never met his physical equal. At 6 feet 3 inches and 210 pounds, he possessed a reach advantage of nearly 8 inches and outweighed his potential opponent by 75 pounds. More importantly, he had faced the best fighters in the world and emerged victorious through a combination of speed, power, and psychological warfare that had revolutionized the sport of boxing. It was Muhammad Ali who first noticed Bruce Lee standing at ringside. According to multiple witnesses, the champion's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a tightening around the eyes that his trainers had learned to recognize as curiosity mixed with calculation. Ali had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in the fighting community had heard about the martial artist from Hong Kong who moved like water and struck like lightning. But stories were one thing, reality was another. What happened next would be debated for decades. Some witnesses claimed Ali issued a direct challenge. Others insisted it began as a jest, the champion's famous wit seeking to entertain the crowd. The most reliable accounts suggest something more subtle, a series of exchanges, verbal sparring that gradually escalated until someone reports differ on who mentioned the words that changed everything. One strike, the phrase hung in the air like a suspended blade. According to those present, Lee had been explaining his philosophy of combat, speaking in that soft, measured tone that forced listeners to lean forward. He spoke of efficiency, of removing all unnecessary movement, of striking not through the target but beyond it. Ali, never one to let a statement pass unchallenged, had asked the question that everyone was thinking. Your best shot, free, I won't block. The arena fell silent. Even the distant sound of traffic seemed to fade. Those who were there swear they could hear their own heartbeats, the rush of blood in their ears. The challenge was so audacious, so contrary to every principle of combat sports, that for a moment no one quite believed it had been spoken aloud. Lee's response came after a pause that witnesses described as lasting anywhere from 3 seconds to 30, time distortion being a common feature of traumatic memory. He did not smile, he did not posture, he simply tilted his head slightly, as if considering a mathematical equation. You will fall, he said, according to multiple accounts. Not a boast, not a threat, a statement of observed fact, like noting that dropped objects fall toward the earth. The negotiations that followed revealed the depth of respect between the two men, even as they prepared for what could only be described as controlled violence. Terms were established with the precision of a legal contract. One strike only. Lee would remain still. Ali would not block, would not move, would simply absorb the impact as he had absorbed hundreds of punches from the hardest hitters in boxing. If he remained standing, he would return the favor, though several witnesses reported that Lee showed no concern about this possibility. As word spread through the building, people abandoned their training to crowd around the ring. The atmosphere, according to those present, became almost oppressive. Some accounts differ on who suggested they move to a private training ring in the back of the facility. The smaller space would contain the consequences, whatever they might be. The migration was conducted in near silence, 300 people moving without speaking, their footsteps creating a rhythmic shuffle that one witness likened to a funeral procession. The comparison would prove more apt than anyone could have guessed. In the smaller ring, under harsher lights that eliminated all shadows, the contrast between the two men became even more pronounced. Ali, stripped to boxing shorts, his musculature a testament to years of conditioning, moved with the easy confidence of an apex predator. Every gesture was magnified by his size, every movement a reminder of the physical mathematics that govern combat sports. Lee had removed only his shoes. The street clothes remained, as if this were merely an interruption in his day. He entered the ring with a single step, no bounce, no ceremony, just a simple transition from outside to inside. Those closest to the ring reported that the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Center ring, someone called out. Though neither man needed the direction, they moved toward each other with the inevitability of opposing weather systems. At a distance of 6 feet they stopped. What followed was perhaps the strangest minute in the history of combat sports. Neither man moved, yet the tension escalated with each passing second. Ollie stood in a relaxed boxing stance, hands low, chin slightly raised in deliberate vulnerability. He was, true to his word, offering no defense whatsoever. Lee stood as he had at ringside, weight evenly distributed, arms hanging naturally. To observers, he appeared to be doing nothing at all. Yet those with martial arts training reported something else entirely. His breathing had changed, becoming so subtle as to be nearly invisible. The micro-movements that characterize living beings, the tiny adjustments and compensations that happen unconsciously, had ceased. He had become utterly unnaturally still, like watching a statue breathe, one witness would later tell reporters, before immediately contradicting himself. No, that's wrong. Statues don't breathe. That was the point. Accounts differ on how long this tableau lasted. The referee, an experienced official who had overseen dozens of championship fights, later admitted he found himself unable to speak or move, caught in the strange paralysis that had gripped the room. His job was to ensure fighter safety, to enforce rules, and to maintain order. But what rules applied to this? What order could be maintained when the very air seemed to vibrate with potential violence? Then Lee moved. The witnesses, athletes, trainers, fighters who had dedicated their lives to understanding human movement, could not agree on what they saw. The most common description was negative. They knew what they had not seen. There had been no telegraph, no loading of weight, no preparatory movement of any kind. One instant, Lee was standing with his hands at his sides. Next, his right hand was returning to that same position. The sound arrived a fraction of a second later, a sharp crack like a gunshot that caused several people to flinch. But by then, everyone's attention was on Ali. The champion's expression had not changed. His eyes remained focused, showing neither pain nor surprise. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, he stood exactly as he had before, unmarked and unmoved. Witnesses would later swear they saw him smile slightly, as if he had won some private bet with himself. Then his knees buckled. It was not the dramatic collapse seen in boxing matches where fighters crash to the canvas like felled trees. This was something more disturbing, a systematic shutdown, as if someone were carefully dismantling a machine. First the knees, then the hips, then a forward pitch that Ali seemed to observe with detached interest even as it happened to him. He caught himself on his hands, preventing a complete fall, but the effort cost him. Those close enough to see his face reported that all color had drained from it. His diaphragm spasmed visibly, the massive muscles of his torso contracting in waves as his body fought to remember how to breathe. The silence that followed was absolute. 300 people, many of them professional fighters who had seen every form of combat trauma, stood frozen in collective disbelief. The referee, finally remembering his purpose, rushed forward, then stopped, uncertain what to do. This was not a sanctioned bout. There were no counts to administer, no corners to direct fighters to. Ali remained on his hands and knees for 5 seconds that witnesses universally describe as the longest of their lives. His breathing, when it finally returned, came in short gasps that sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. Slowly, with the determination that had carried him through 15 rounds with the best fighters in the world, he pushed himself back to his knees. Lee had not moved. He stood exactly where he had delivered the strike, watching with what observers described as clinical detachment. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement of what he had just accomplished. He simply waited. When Ali finally regained his feet, swaying slightly but standing under his own power, he did something that would be debated and analyzed for decades. He extended his glove toward Lee, not in challenge but in acknowledgement. The gesture was so unexpected that it took Lee a moment to respond, reaching out to tap the extended glove with his bare hand. "What did you do?" Ali asked, his voice hoarse but clear enough to be heard by those nearest the ring. The question contained no accusation, only genuine curiosity. Lee's response, reported by multiple witnesses though the exact wording varies, was characteristic in its simplicity. "I showed you. Martial arts is not about power, about precision, understanding the body, striking vulnerability, not strength." The champion nodded slowly, still visibly working to control his breathing. What he said next would become the source of endless speculation and controversy. Nobody will believe this. He was right, of course. Within hours, the story had begun to fragment. Some witnesses would claim the entire event had been staged, a publicity stunt orchestrated by two masters of self-promotion. Others would insist the strike had not been that devastating, that Ali had simply been caught off guard. A few would deny it had happened at all, their memories unable to reconcile what they had seen with what they knew to be possible. But for those who remained in the immediate aftermath, watching as Ali was helped from the ring by his entourage, while Lee quietly collected his shoes and slipped away without fanfare, the reality was undeniable. They had witnessed something that challenged not just their understanding of combat sports, but their conception of human capability itself. The referee, in his official capacity, should have filed a report. He should have documented what he had seen, created some official record of the event. Instead, he did what most of the witnesses would eventually do. He tried to forget. The human mind, when confronted with the impossible, often chooses revision over revolution, yet forgetting proved difficult. In the days that followed, those who had been present found themselves replaying the moment obsessively. The strike itself remained a cipher, too fast to process, too subtle to understand, but its effect was carved into memory with disturbing clarity. The sight of perhaps the greatest heavyweight boxer in history, brought to his knees by a single blow from a man he outweighed by 75 pounds, was not something that could be easily dismissed. Some began training differently, incorporating elements of martial arts into their routines. Others doubled down on conventional methods, as if by perfecting traditional techniques they could somehow negate what they had witnessed. A few left fighting altogether, unable to reconcile their years of training with the demonstration of its limitations. Ali himself, according to those close to him, never spoke publicly about the event. In private, however, he was said to have developed a deep respect for martial arts, occasionally inviting practitioners to train with him, always searching for that perfect combination of speed and precision that had been demonstrated so devastatingly that day. Lee, characteristically, treated the entire event as unremarkable. When asked about it in the rare interviews where journalists had done enough research to know what questions to ask, he would deflect with philosophical observations about the nature of combat or demonstrations of principles using inanimate objects. He never confirmed or denied what had happened, leaving others to debate while he continued developing his art. The building where it occurred was demolished 3 years later, taking with it any physical evidence of the event. The ring, the lights, the very air that had witnessed the impossible, all reduced to rubble and memory. Even the exact date became a matter of dispute, with witnesses placing it anywhere across 6 months, their certainty inversely proportional to their distance from the event. But for those who were there, who stood close enough to hear the sharp crack of impact and watch a champion fall, no amount of time could fully erase what they had seen. They carried it with them like a splinter of possibility embedded too deep to extract, a reminder that the world contained more than their training had taught them to expect. Late at night, when the gym lights cast familiar shadows, and the sound of gloves on heavy bags created a rhythm as old as boxing itself, they would sometimes catch themselves pausing. In those moments of stillness, they would remember another kind of stillness, absolute and waiting. They would remember how thin the line was between standing and falling, how a single precise action could render strength irrelevant. Most of all, they remembered the question Ali had asked and the answer he had given himself. Nobody would believe it. He had been right about that. History, written by consensus rather than witness, had already begun its work of revision. The event, too strange for conventional narrative, would be relegated to rumor and speculation. Yet they knew what they had seen. A man without mass had defeated mass itself. A strike too subtle to perceive had felled a giant. The impossible had worn street clothes and spoken in measured tones about precision over power. In the end, perhaps that was the most unsettling aspect of all, not that the impossible had occurred, but that it had done so without drama, without warning, without any of the ceremony that typically attended legendary moments. It had simply happened, like breath becoming stillness, like standing becoming falling, like certainty dissolving into questions that would never quite heal. The arena lights had cast shadows that should not have existed that day. 300 people had seen something that defied explanation, and somewhere in the space between memory and myth, between what happened and what could have happened, the truth waited with perfect stillness, unmarked by time, unchanged by disbelief, as precise and devastating as a single perfect strike. Those who were there never forgot, even as the world chose to, especially as the world chose to.